this weekend, Squad had its 6th and final playtest. Final playtest? Because I know the last one was supposed to be final. But I think this is the final. There might be a reason to do another playtest after this, as there still is some things to work out, but there's a good chance it's the final one. I don't know. Regardless, it's their 6th playtest. This playtest had a lot of really cool changes I really enjoyed. A lot of things that I'm looking forward to in the actual game, and a lot of things that really still need to be ironed out. I mean, it's a playtest. There's going to be issues like every single other playtest, but there was a significant amount of bugs and problems in this one that really do need to be fixed before they're released in full. But we did get a lot of new content, a lot of good changes, so I want to start with those first. The first major change that I really enjoyed was the gunplay. They reduced the sway from the ICO. I don't want to say significantly, but enough to a point where it's noticeable and a lot more fun in the average game for average gunfights. There was so many more gunfights where I felt like I could actually hit people, especially when shooting in full auto. And I thought the game just overall played a lot better due to the changes. I'm so happy it seems like they actually made LMGs viable again. They reduced this whole massive recoil thing when hip firing, so it's not as bad. It's still not great, but it's actually usable. And they operate similar to how they used to operate when bipoded. They're not an absolute laser beam, but they are so much better than bipoded. In current Squad, it just was always so weird to me that a bipoded LMG still had the most insane recoil, or just you had to tap fire to be able to actually hit anything, and it just didn't feel like the bullets were going where you were aiming sometimes. So actually making LMGs viable again is a much welcome change, and I'm so glad that they implemented this. I honestly think they could still go further with reverting some aspects of the ICO to make the gunplay even better, but overall I think the gunplay is in a much better state in this build, and I'm so happy that they changed it to the way that it is. Another pro is how the game looks. This playtest didn't look variably different than the other playtests, but just in general, the game does look better than current Squad. I know some people were having some differing opinions about how the lighting works and how kind of the brightness is tuned up to a level that's very strange versus normal Squad, and the color filter looks different. But overall, I personally enjoy it, and while I do think the lighting could be changed in a way to make lighting in certain rooms more visible, there was quite a few engagements I got into where I could not see the people I was trying to shoot at in the building unless they shot at me, because I could see their muzzle flash, which the muzzle flash thing was really cool. If there's an enemy and you're trying to find them and they're in a building, you will see their muzzle flash light up the room that they're firing from, and it makes them a lot easier to see. But at the same time, if you are looking into a room with a scope and trying to find somebody that you know is probably in there, it is really hard to see them a lot of the times if the room is dark. And I got killed multiple times trying to squint and look into a dark room to see if I could see anyone, just for the guy in there to see me and shoot me while I was outside, because I was silhouetted when he was in just a dark room. So I would like the brightness, I think, in rooms to go up a little bit, just to, one, make it so that people can't just sit in a dark room and shoot you before you see them as a viable strategy, and two, to make muzzle flashes not as visible, because sometimes it was a little ridiculous how crazy I could pinpoint somebody's position just based on their muzzle flash because they were in a building. Now, another really cool thing that they added in with this update was the CRF, the Canadian Resistance Forces. This was a nice little addition just to add some content in a time where we've really had a lack of content recently, and while it probably wasn't the most time intensive faction to add to the game, a lot of the weapons, the vehicles, even character models to the extent seem like they're kind of reused, but at the same time, like, it does play like a different faction. It does have its own unique play style, and the way that you play it is different from factions that are already in the game. It also isn't the main topic of the update, even though it is reusing some old assets. I'm completely happy with what they're doing with this, and hopefully they will do more things like this in the future with other regions. The faction itself seemed like it was balanced okay. It played a lot like a hybrid of Insurgents and the PMCs that we already have in the game. Insurgents in that they have mostly iron sight weapons, and they're a lot of older weapons and not as technologically advanced, but they were still pretty good. There was a lot of like single shots that you could just spam in a general direction of the enemy to either suppress them or kill them. They have a backpack that is basically just a tannerite backpack, which you shoot to explode rather than detonate remotely, which I thought was really cool. For armor, they have a coyote, so they already kind of have better armor in a way than PMCs. I didn't see in any of the layers that I played that they had a tank, so that maybe evens them out with PMCs a little bit in that regard. But overall, I had a fun time playing with them. I think new insurgent resistance forces in all these different regions is a fun little thing they can do, where they can reuse some of the assets but still rework some stuff and add little small things to make them feel unique and make them feel different. And they did feel different. I would love to see, especially with on the roadmap, the French forces coming out, which is most likely the mod that they bought. That mod had several maps that was taking place in Africa. I'd love to see an African resistance force. I'd love to see an Asian resistance force or insurgent force, because we have maps like Sanction and hopefully more Pacific maps coming our way. I think this is a really nice way for OWI to be able to use some of the assets we already have in game while adding new things to make a new faction that feels different but is not completely different. As long as it isn't the main focus of a main update, I'm okay with this because it is new content, although it isn't completely unique to the stuff we already have in the game. In addition to that, in this current build of the playtest, they changed the MEA faction to Iran specifically. Now, I know this was already in the roadmap, so we knew this was coming, but it's still cool to see. I always thought that off-branding Iran and kind of combining it with Iraq in terms of the MEA was a bit strange. I know there were specific reasons why it was done, but in the kind of game that Squad is, I'm glad that they're actually going to name real-life countries in this rather than resorting to a vague coalition-type force for certain regions of the world. I think it goes much better with the new factions that they're adding, such as Ukraine, and making it more authentic to the world of Squad. And they did make a few subtle changes to MEA in changing them over to Iran, just with some of the kit composition. The SLs now have an option for an Iron Sight M4. There's a lot more AK options as well as G3 options on the faction. So not a whole lot of changes, but enough to make them be a little different than they play in current Squad. In terms of how performance goes, it varies significantly once again. I personally had no problems with performance, but I do have a newer graphics card. I heard a lot of people with older cards complaining that it made their experience worse, but for me, I was getting significantly more frames than I was in normal Squad. The general consensus, I think, is that older cards are going to struggle, while newer cards are going to see a nice performance boost. This seemed to be kind of the main consensus on the last playtest as well, but it also varies significantly from that. I've heard people of having amazing setups and having some weird technical issues. Hopefully those will get ironed out by the time it releases, but sorry, bad news if you do have an older card. They did not really cater to you, I don't think, with this update. But who knows, they might tweak some things before the final release comes out, so hopefully it does improve some of the performance issues. I never had any real performance issues in the older playtests. Baza ran much better on my computer the last couple than it did the first playtest. The only map that I had any major performance issues on was Sanction. It was lagging quite bad when we were playing the map. Sanction doesn't perform the best on normal Squad for me, but it was really weird how specific regions were struggling a lot more than others, and I don't know what this issue was, because I don't think that really happens as drastically in normal Sanction on base game Squad than it did in the playtest. Two other small changes was the addition of this casual skirmish mode. I believe it was just called experimental skirmish on the playtest. It played very similarly to Conquest from Battlefield, except the first 2 points you need to back cap before you can go to any other point on the map. It was set in a smaller layer like skirmish, except that there was no vehicles, there was no habs. You had to either put down rallies or just run from main. I think a casual game mode like this was really fun. I had a really good time. Squad's Gunplay doesn't work as well for this type of game mode, I think, as obviously something like Battlefield, which it's inspired by, but at the same time, it was still a nice little mix-up, and I got to have some pretty fun and intense gunfights and play Squad in a way that is different than I normally would have played it. I hope this game mode gets added in and is played semi-frequently. It's just a nice mix-up. It's not something that I want Squad to turn into, obviously, but it's still just a fun little side game mode that you can play from time to time with some friends, get some intense PvP and some great gunfights, and the matches themselves go pretty quick, so if you need it as like a seeding layer or just kind of a first layer to get the night going, I think it would work great for that. The other small new addition was that the Russian marksman now has two different options in addition to the normal marksman for VDV. They have a VSS and an AS-Val, both of which are suppressed and both of which are interesting to say the least. Very up close with them, I was melting people with the hip fire at full auto, and long range, being able to snipe people with suppressor was really OP. Personally though, I don't really know if I like this change as a kit. The kit seems it's just going to be very annoying to deal with, and it's going to encourage a lot of people to just lay prone in the grass as a marksman and try and pick people off as they normally do, which would be great, but it just kind of goes further into encouraging the marksman kit to just not play with the squad and not play with the team and be his own little sneaky selfish guy that plays mainly for himself. The gun is cool, but I don't think its implementation for squad leads is going to cause any less headaches for marksmen in squad. Now that we've gone through all the good, let's go through some of the bad. The bugs on this playtest were quite bad. There was a lot of just legacy squad bugs that either returned or came up in different ways than they had in normal squad that I found. There was just so many little things that hampered the experience of this playtest significantly for me. The audio, first and foremost, was terrible. I don't know what has been going on in this playtest. I feel like one of the playtests I played, if it was not the last one, the one previous to that, had pretty decent audio compared to the first couple, but whatever they did, this build of the playtest completely reverted it. My own footsteps behind me sounded like people walking slightly behind me, which has been a bug in several builds of squad throughout the years, and it was quite annoying. Audio from guns and vehicles, the distance did not sound right. I was sometimes not hearing gunshots that were 2 feet from me. My gun itself sometimes just was silent when it was firing, and we actually had a dev in our squad one of the games who was telling us that if you have this issue, the only way to fix it is to reconnect currently. Additionally, footstep audio was horrible. There was times where guys would sprint up on me and I would not hear them behind me, and there was other times I could hear people from like 2 buildings away. This seems to be a reoccurring issue with a lot of the playtest builds where the audio is just completely broken for both vehicles and infantry and guns alike. So hopefully they can square that out and get it back to what normal squad audio is, because normal squad audio does sometimes have occasional problems, but is not nearly as bad as what we had in this playtest. Other than that, there was a lot of various visual bugs that we saw throughout the playtest. A lot of the roads on Yeeho were glowing this weird pink color. On Sanction, a lot of the roads were just straight up missing, and the ones that were there were yellow for some reason. There was various times where there would be smoke grenades that would go off, and they were so bright I was almost blinded by the smoke grenade and could not see. Also, on the same Sanction layer, for some reason, half the boats were bugged where they just wouldn't move on the water properly. So we were driving at like 2 miles an hour until we got to a certain point, and then it just dead stopped with us in the ocean. We ended up having to jump off the boat and respawn just to be able to actually play the game, and the boat was just there static, unmovable the entire rest of the game. Radios on some layers were bugged where no one could dig them up or down. We had a whole layer on Yeeho where the radios were just not able to be dug down, so everybody just had to use combat NG charges to blow up radios. There was a lot of issues with the scopes still. Overall, I'd say that PIP scopes have improved drastically since we first got them, but we still have these occasional issues, especially in these playtest builds. Sometimes you would look in your scope and it would just be completely black. Other times I got this just static image of the scenery. The only way for me to fix it was for me to select another weapon that I had equipped with the scope. So in this case I was hat, so I equipped my hat and scoped in as the hat, and then swapped back to my gun and then scoped in and it would fix it. But this only worked every time I respawned. Every time I respawned I would have the same bug again, and it would have to take out my hat, scope in, unscope, and then take my weapon out every time I wanted to actually properly use my weapon. And I had guys in my squad that had kits that didn't have a secondary weapon with the scope on it that they just couldn't fix it. And so they were just stuck with this static picture scope for the entirety of the match. Driving played semi-similar as the other playtests. There was some tweaks to it, and Personally, I don't really like the new system. Their intention seems to be to give vehicles a lot more weight to them. While I like how they're going for this more realistic kind of depiction, at the same time, it just makes driving so tedious in some points. I mean, I had to slam on the e-brake and full reverse on turns to be able to stop the vehicle, and most of the time I would overshoot. It was so difficult to actually get a vehicle to behave like you wanted to when you were driving. The amount of times people like would do these drift spin out while trying to turn just because they couldn't stop their vehicle was insane. In addition to this, there was this weird bug where they're trying to make it when you drive, your like body moves with the vehicle, but it didn't sync right. So when you were driving a vehicle, your body just started falling out of the vehicle or going into the lap of the guy next to you. And half of the time when you were going up a hill or down a hill, your body would go so far into the ceiling or so low into the seat that you couldn't even figure out where you were looking or where you were going. Something like this is game breaking enough that I am almost certain it is going to be addressed and fixed, as well as most of these bugs when the game releases. But it was a bit discouraging to see how many of these really bad bugs made it into this playtest. These were just the ones that I personally witnessed myself. I've heard of people talking about other weird stuff that was going on, and it was just every game was affected by these really bad bugs that I hope they can iron out and maybe get another playtest. I really respect OWI for acknowledging the fact that the build was not ready when they wanted to originally release it, which I assume was around their 10-year anniversary. But if these issues don't get ironed out pretty quick, we could use another playtest, because as much as I love Squad and I would really like to see more content out for the game, as it is lacking in so much content right now, we are not in a good spot with all these bugs to release the build as is. The new content was cool, the reworked weapons was awesome, but please, please, please fix these bugs before it gets to the main game. If I have to deal with all these audio issues and just driving issues in the main game, it is going to be unplayable. And on that note, as negative as I was about the bugs and how it kind of hampered my experience in this playtest, at the same time, this playtest was some of the most fun I've had in Squad in years. Maybe it's just due to the fact that we have had no content for 8 months in current Squad, other than a few very minor changes, but also a lot of veterans and experienced players will come back and participate in these playtests. These playtests themselves, you can really tell, is the passionate members of the Squad community are the ones that are out here playing them. I got so many opportunities to play with content creators and devs in my squad or just in local, and I felt like the player base was so much better in this kind of closed environment than it is in normal Squad, and it really kind of reminded me of when Squad was a much smaller community, and that you would run into content creators and devs on the main servers relatively frequently. I know there is no direct fix for this. This is just how it is with the game expanding over time, but it really reminded me of those times, and that combined with the new content really made this experience fun, and this is the most I've played Squad in a long time. I was on every day that weekend playing Squad, wanting to play more. I'm so grateful that I got the opportunity to play with all the different devs and content creators, as well as just with friends, that we had a great time with experimenting with new mechanics and being passionate about the game we love. So hopefully they can iron out some of the issues. But overall, I'm really excited now for this update. I know the content isn't something that I've explicitly wanted in all of the different videos I've released recently, but I think this is a really great stepping stone for Squad's future, and I hope that they continue to improve it and that we get the release of this update soon and in a much better playable state. Thank you all if you stayed this long into the video. I appreciate you guys watching. If you haven't watched my highlights and clips video I released earlier this week, all featuring clips from the playtest, I highly recommend watching that as well. I'll leave a link to that in the description as well as the end card. Otherwise, please remember to like and subscribe, and I will catch you guys in the next one.